For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashni Whitley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss part 4 of his column, 25 Years of Democracy, Decline of the Liberation Project. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, must we conclude from your article that the type of things that could change South Africa will not happen through our votes?
I'm not saying the vote is insignificant. For example, when the DA and other parties ousted the ANC from Nelson Mandela Bay, Johannesburg and Tshwane, that was very significant. However, I don't think living in Johannesburg that the DA government has made much difference. I mean, around here, the number of potholes, I mean, whichever road you go, there are potholes, and I'm sure it's all over Johannesburg, probably even in Sandton, I don't know. But I think so. So I think it's possible, had the DA been able to pull off what they did in Cape Town, in the areas that they took over, which they don't seem to have managed to do, it would have made a difference in some ways. And I think if the ANC doesn't get 50%, it will be important. However, what I was trying to say rather is that when we elected a democratic government which represented the poorest of the poor, which came from the poorest section of the population in its origins, it didn't translate into changes in people's lives because a number of other factors happened. For example, the ANC in the civil service had to translate a manifesto in each case into policies that became laws. And you bring in people there who haven't come from ANC branches or ANC generalists, national general councils, these things. These are technocrats. So a lot of the things that happen then are far removed from your vote. And they are part of the way government works in this type of era.
And you refer to events in the 1990s changing the character of the ANC into an electoralist party. Can you just explain that?
Yes, you know, some of us are like dinosaurs, you know. I don't like calling the ANC a party because I was opposed to the ANC becoming a party as opposed to remaining liberation movement. For me, it meant a liberation movement is something that's very close to the people, who's continually consulting with them, things like that. Now, when the ANC was unbanned, there were floods of people giving advice, specialists on transition, specialists on political parties, all these things. And they were saying, the sooner you modernize, the better it will be for you. Why don't you turn the ANC into a political party? Then it can really change things in this country. Now that advice was actually loaded. It meant stripping the ANC of this contact and accountability, except in a formal sense, and connection with the masses from whom the ANC had come. And in fact, that happened. The ANC became an electoral party. When they're making all these xenophobic statements at the moment, it's partly a result of polling. They hear, okay, people don't like foreigners, then they bring out something about foreigners. But they also find it convenient because that's a way of shifting the blame for the hospitals collapsing. It's because the foreigners are overloading it or something like that. So there's a tendency to listen more to polling than to listen to your own constituency carefully. And it no longer has a role as an educational organization. When you speak of an educational organization, most Western parties don't see themselves in that relationship to its people. But the ANC, in its January the 8th statements and many other things, used to explain what was happening in the country. How do we end this? How do we go forward? And so I was very unhappy about that. No one said, look, tomorrow we'll be a political party. But clearly some people had that in mind. Some of the features of governing we had not prepared for. People like myself had not been thinking about how the civil service would be run. But also the civil service, I think, has taken on a model which is very hierarchical, very undemocratic, and it need not be entirely like that. So that's part of a broader problem.
And you also repeatedly referred to the moral decline in the ANC and the liberation project that led it. Can you elaborate on the meaning, and also what can we as citizens do about it?
Yeah, you know, when you make a comment on the moral qualities of others, it may sound sanctimonious, but clearly what has happened in the Gupta period, the Bosasa things, and many others are sort of undermining of the ethics that people associated with the ANC. Someone like Lyndon T. Richmond, he was at one point a very brave person who worked in Lesotho, and he risked his life. Now, what has happened in this period is that people got put into positions where they formed groups with one another to advance certain goals. Not everyone was part of a patronage group, but people got associated with leaders. That became more important to them than advancing the ideas of the organization or ideas that would benefit the people. More importantly, however, when the ANC got access to business opportunities, first through BEE, but then through the state, some people started to change their lifestyle, and they wanted to change that no matter whether it was legal or illegal. And in many cases, the costs of their benefiting their lifestyle has been borne by state projects that should have been used to benefit the poor. And that, to me, is the moral decline, that these people became indifferent, and I think in many cases remain indifferent to the people from whom they come, people who are their parents or equivalent of their parents don't matter to them. What matters to them is their wealth. And as citizens, what I think we have to do is understand, and here we come back to the first question about the vote. The voting is just an individual act. You go in, cast your vote, and you tell the ANC, you vote ANC, you tell the DA, you vote the DA, and all these things. But to change the moral quality of the country means people must come together. They must come together and they must say to themselves, I want to find a way of remedying this. And people did come together against Zuma, but they evaporated into little individual groups. You need to build organization, an organization beyond what there has been before, join people together in order to recover the hopes that we had in 1994, and also augment them with new ideas that we may have had in the years that have passed, which can make that freedom even broader and deeper than it was intended in 1994.
Thanks for speaking with us, Professor.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about Part 4 of his column, 25 Years of Democracy, Decline of the Liberation Project.